Welcome, everyone. This is the work session of the Marion City Council for Tuesday, July 5th, 2016. Are we starting with engineering?
Are you really? Wow. Caught me off guard.
Ta-da. Surprise.
I've only got a couple things. First thing was a response to the ordinance request and redo of ordinance number 6906, which includes the length of reservation spaces. This is number 2 under engineering. Basically what we're recommending is that we take the verbiage from the state code and stick it into our code. That would probably be the cleanest, easiest. There are things within our code, such as specifically churches, that are not in the state code. However, it does talk about large assemblages of people, so it would be covered by that. Within your memo, you can see both the old wording and the new wording. We're just recommending that we go ahead and use the new wording. We'll do the normal readings, 3 considerations, and approve that and have it codified within our code. The biggest change probably is that right now we have 50 feet. This would be not to exceed 50 feet. Any questions on that? Okay, the second item is item number 8. Which is with the Swalleys. I'm going to butcher their name. I think it's Swalley, but they basically own south of the southeast corner lot that was bought by the city at the corner of 29th Avenue and 35th Street. They have since, I've been working with them, they were interested in coming up with some way to create new buffering at the back side or the north side of their property up against the city property. I asked them to put together a recommendation or a request, basically stating what they would like to see. I know this is probably prettier than you're used to, but they will be here, I assume, on Thursday to discuss this. The main goal for them is to create more buffering. This is basically the south 30 feet of our lot. This is the north property line of their property. 35th Street's over here. 29th is up above. Basically, they're asking for the city to participate in creating that buffering financially after either creating an easement for them or allowing them as a whole harmless process to occupy the property, use the property, or to sell the property to them. Staff is not really recommending that we sell the property to them. So in case in sometime in the future we need that for right away, we would not want to have to buy it back at that time. Basically, what it would, within the memo, you can see that they're requesting that under option 1, well, actually in both, that the city would remove the damaged bushes and sidewalk. The sidewalk's not been repaired, but the bushes have now been taken out. I think Parks Department did that. They're also asking for about a $250 to $300 evergreen buffer to be planted, and that the city would pay approximately $4,000 to create a privacy fence on the west and north side where the blue line is on this property. Their concern is the additional noise, wind, just overall lighting, everything from the roundabout. Staff is just bringing this forward. They asked us to bring this before council to see what your position would be as far as supporting the project financially.
There's noise and wind from the roundabout?
Well, from the vacancy of the lot now with the house being gone.
Okay.
What's the depth of the city lot? So they want 30 feet of it.
It's around 120, I think.
120, okay.
So they just want a portion of it. I'm sure they would take more if you wanted to give it to them, but this is what they're looking for, is to create that fencing, the buffering.
Well, we're not going to be selling the property. I mean, if I understand correctly, we bought it for potential use in the future to expand the
Yes.
intersection.
Yes, and staff would not recommend that you sell it, and
Okay.
they understand that. They're just asking. If you feel like they can come before you, ask what they want to ask, see if they can get any response from you on this. Totally up to you. Staff is not making a recommendation one way or the other on the participation, so.
Have we heard anything from the adjacent property owners on the flip side of this? So they're not experiencing the same, am I understanding?
No,
The other side of 30.
no, the other properties, I've not heard anything from the west side or from the east side of this lot. I have not, no.
Okay, thanks.
So that 6 to 8, okay, so create a buffer with evergreens, 6 to 8 of them at $40 a pop. So it's $40 per evergreen bush is what they're,
Yeah, and that $240 to $320 range, I think I put in the memo.
right.
They would like the city
in
to buy
bushes.
those and plant them, and also buy and install the fence.
I would think maybe a hold harmless, and if whatever they wanted to spend on it would be up to them. I don't think the city should participate monetarily. And definitely not sell it, because it would be another Longfellow fiasco where they sold it for $1 and then paid how much to get it back, and that would probably be what would happen to that parcel.
That typically happens with when you sell property close to a right-of-way, is end up buying it back at some point.
Dan, are you looking for a direction on this tonight or on Thursday?
No, I would just hope that you would listen to them on Thursday when they come and give them some direction on what you're willing to do.
Yeah, I'd like to drive by and kind of take a look at things too.
Staff's just kind of working with them, trying to help them out, trying to make sure
Sure.
they get before council, understand the process, that kind of thing.
Nope, I totally can appreciate what they're asking, so kudos that they are involving the city in some of these questions, so.
Thank you. Oh, I had one more.
One more.
Yeah.
Having to do with the concurrence of the removal of the building, having to do with the memorandum of agreement the city approved previously for the purchase of right-of-way along the 7th Avenue corridor. Basically along 7th Avenue where this gets reconstructed, the new roundabouts to the west, 31st Street is off to the east here. The buildings partially lie within the right-of-way we're purchasing and the easement that we're purchasing. As part of that agreement, the city would be responsible for the $14,000 to remove the building and the concrete pad and the foundations for the building.
Which building is this? I'm sorry.
It's Agra, Prince Agra.
Okay.
There is other building here. There's more back in here. We're just doing the ones that are overlapping with the right-of-way that we're buying.
The rest would not be our responsibility.
Right.
And this is, we would give them the amount and they're taking care of all the demolition, or are we actually going in?
We're concurring with the contract, which then the contractor would do the work for the developer. We would reimburse them for that cost.
Okay.
We did not do competitive bids or anything. This is part of that overall contract for the concurrence with the developer. Okay?
Oh my God. He's 5 minutes ahead.
We're just getting warmed up.
Just getting warmed up.
Great.
Good afternoon.
Now that we can get it on visually, we can really get after them.
I know. Me too.
The first item under planning is a public hearing on Thursday related to future land use map amendment and a rezoning request for property along 6th Avenue, just west of 10th Street, the core of the community. You've received the staff report on it and have been kind of briefed on it through that. But really, what's being proposed is a pretty, I'd say, a pretty neat mixed-use development along the south side of 6th Avenue. I believe the developer provided with you a separate handout on the project. Did you guys get this?
Nope.
Okay. I'll get it to you. But the project incorporates some of the existing housing into a mixed-use development along the 6th Avenue between 8th and 9th Street. It's got a mixed-use component involving the houses that are some of the houses that are currently sitting there. Final plans and specifications haven't been exactly adopted, but as you can see, there's some mixed use of commercial on the property. Should be a pretty unique project. The request is to go from the residential to the commercial for the half block of that street. So as the council's aware, when 6th Avenue is complete, that's going to be the main thoroughfare. Currently, there's a couple homes on the site, including the larger brick building on the corner of 8th and 6th, which that takes up the entire half block, and then there's 2 other buildings on that block as well. So it does make sense from staff's perspective to see this area go to a more commercial use and blend back to the neighborhood. Obviously, if someone came in with a very intensive, not respecting the neighborhood, we'd probably have more concerns. We still have requested as part of the rezoning request that a site plan be brought back for approval as a part of the project, and the owners and applicants have agreed to that. They are here in the audience this evening if you have specific questions regarding the proposal. But on Thursday, there's a public hearing regarding a map amendment to our comprehensive plan, because if you recall, the comp plan was adopted in 2010. The corridor plan was underway and being contemplated, but it wasn't necessarily reflective of the land use and alignment, or the alignment of 6th Avenue at the time. So I do believe that we're going to have to go back and probably make some adjustments to our core based on what happens when 6th Avenue becomes a major thoroughfare. I think Councilman Spinks has mentioned a couple times that we need to kind of tweak that comp plan, and we're getting to the point that we need to start looking at that. So we'll start seeing probably a couple map amendments in this area as we move forward. The zoning would go from the residential, multifamily residential district to the C2, which is your uptown district, where the buildings are generally brought forward. There's no off-street parking requirements, so it's on-street parking. I believe as a part of this project, they are looking at some off-street spaces as well as on-street, but that's certainly not a requirement in the uptown district. So, are there questions regarding the project in the staff report?
Have they done anything else locally? Perry Development Partners?
No, they're new to the community. We've been Dave has been primarily working with them on this project, and they've been in. They're working with Kyle Martin Design, and they've provided a great deal of graphics as a part of the project. I don't think we normally get to see 3D renderings and such, so that's been very helpful for us. As you know, with the growth that we have in the area, it's nice to see visually what's being proposed. Granted, these aren't the finals, but it gives a concept for what the developer envisions for the property. And I'd say we're pretty excited about the project from a staff perspective. So
Does C2, oh, 1 second.
So you can have them. It was our understanding you guys have some background about Perry Development.
Thank you. Tom, does C2, does that include mixed use?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So this is just for rezoning the property.
So there'll be a future land use map amendment
Okay.
as a part of the comp plan as a resolution, and then the rezoning public hearing will be on the agenda as well, and then the first reading of the ordinance to rezone the property. So there's 3 readings of the ordinance.
I would question the parking.
Yeah.
Since that will be like the first block actually off of the roundabout, I would think that people would be a little hesitant to just park on the street. I would want to see off-street parking.
There is parking planned on the front side of the property. They are talking about doing some off-street spaces. I think the key is understanding that it's not required. It's very rare for there to be requirements for parking in an uptown urban district. Because as soon as you start requiring parking in that type of a situation, you're immediately eating up your ground that's of high value for parking spaces.
Well, I guess the problem I have is now, as I understand from what I read, there's going to be like apartments involved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so according to wherever I read it, 1.5 parking places per apartment, right?
Not in the C2 district.
Not in the C2. Well, at least you have to have one per
In the
apartment.
C2 district, there's no requirement for parking.
No requirements.
Nope.
Well,
Just like downtown Cedar Rapids, there's no off-street requirements.
It's just like the rest of the uptown buildings. If there's apartments above the buildings, you know, in uptown,
and
there's no
those
requirement to
folks-
provide.
those folks are not happy about that either.
Their
No,
choice to
I'm
live
not,
there.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that's how it is. That's how the.
You're going to
ordinance
find it
reads.
very rare where you're trying to create an urban environment, because urban environments require density. You look at any larger community with a very lively core, you don't see off-street parking. You just don't see it. You may see ramps, and that's being done at the generally done at the private development expense, or some kind of city participation as a part of a larger project. But you really go downtown Des Moines, don't see too many off-street parking lots.
Because I look at Kettle House and there's on-street parking for that, but gosh, that's just really limited. And if this is going to be commercial involved, well, I don't
Well,
know.
and I think you've mentioned that in the past as a part of projects. I understand your concern on it.
Well, that's what I hear, and it's like, well, gee, I'd go there, but I can't find a parking place,
I was just on the phone with somebody that was talking about office space and inability to provide parking, and my window looks that way, and I can see about 20 spots open. So parking problems are, I would say, generally a larger perception than reality. We've done parking, I'll say a modified parking study internally when we've walked around at numerous times during the day just to monitor spaces available, and there's parking available.
Well, there is parking available, but it's not at the place where people want to go.
That's
the
because
problem.
people want to park directly in front of the business and
Exactly.
walk in. If we could solve this problem, we'd make $1 million, I can tell you
Okay.
that very well.
Deal.
Yeah, it's an ongoing battle between main streets and uptown districts and downtown districts on the parking, perceived parking and parking problems. I'm not saying there's never a parking problem. I'm saying that a lot of times it's a perceived problem or a desirability of the parking. So, yep.
Well, given my current situation of not being able to walk any distance comfortably, I'm inclined to want parking right there.
Sure.
Because if I can't have it, I won't go.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So Tom, again, what we're doing on Thursday is just a public hearing for rezoning the property. At some point, we'll hear more about the actual project, or?
Yes, so they're giving you a little sneak peek here, and then as a part of the project, as a part of the approval, there's going to be a site plan submitted to the city for review, city council for review.
So the city council will have the ability to see a site plan and approve that, or?
Correct.
Okay, so before the project goes forward,
If
we
you,
get to see
yeah,
what the
if you
project
look,
is all
Planning
about.
and Zoning Commission review and recommendation of a site plan to the city council for final approval. Yep.
Just so everybody knows too, because not everybody's got a photograph of this, but this particular location here is going to be just outside of the roundabout. So as you come through that roundabout, this will be perceived as being one of the,
Pretty visible spot.
it's going to be right there in front of you as you come through that roundabout. So
Yeah.
it's could be very,
Well, I like that it,
very neat.
at least what I see is that it incorporates some of the existing houses, and so.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of, because there's that brick house there that.
Yeah, that's been a conversation all along, because it's a,
Now, and when they purchase those houses, have they purchased them already?
I don't believe they've been purchased. I could be wrong on
We're
that.
not
I'm
gonna
assuming
have
they're
to-
tied up.
We're not gonna have to pay for relocating the people, are we?
No,
This is not a
private
city
development.
project.
Well, make sure.
They may like that. Yeah, they're all bought.
Any other questions on this one for Tom?
It's an exciting project.
Rezoning? Okay. Next.
We good? Item number 4 is also a public hearing on a request from the First United Methodist Church for preliminary and final site development plan for their property north of REC, west of Highway 13, south of 35th Street. And I presented this at the last meeting. I think I provided in quite a bit of confusion at that meeting. But you have the site plan. We kind of looked at it in detail at the last meeting. And Councilman Spinks had brought up the issue of access onto the property. This is the site that we're talking. So this would be Highway 13, 35th Avenue comes out and hits Highway 13 right here. So this is currently a gravel road. REC Drive comes in here. Bob Berger's development's on the corner. Lynn County REC is to the south, thank you, and Volta is directly west. So this is the preliminary site development plan. As you can see, they're showing a larger build out of the site. That's the difference between the preliminary and the final. They're essentially trying to identify when this project is completed in all phases, this is what they're envisioning. They've got some soccer fields and a parking lot, the church, and in addition to the north, parking out front, an outdoor sanctuary, parking lot to the west. So that's the long range plan, and we like to have that so that we know from a site planning perspective what the overall perspective is. Their final site development plan at this point is what I would consider like the first phase, and that's showing, they've removed some of the improvements along the south side. The sanctuary, or the church is located here with modified parking, so it's not quite as much parking, but they are illustrating the build out. So we've got on the agenda the preliminary site development plan, which was the larger project. The final is what they're moving forward with now. These are the elevations.
They just don't look like churches, do they?
No, they don't.
Traditional
looks like.
traditional churches.
Yeah, but
So that's what's being proposed. As I had indicated at the last meeting, Councilman Spinks had identified a desire to have another ingress and egress onto the site. There was a conversation with the fire department regarding this, and they believe they widened the access road to where the fire department is satisfied with the ingress egress. So we're bringing it forward as staff has saying that it works. If there's further desire for the council to see that come through with the first addition or the first with approval of the final site development, that is completely the council's direction to do so. So if that is desired, that can be made a part of the project as well. But just so the council's aware from a staff perspective, there is some comfort in what's being proposed at this point.
well, I would think they would want 2 exits, only because after a church service, if everybody drives, how long are you going to be lined up to
Yeah.
get out of the parking lot?
Yeah. And there is a public hearing on this on Thursday because it is not consistent with the original final site development plan for this property. And when there is a change from the original, we do like to bring it back to a public hearing so adjacent property owners understand there's been some sort of change. Any questions on that? The applicant should be here on Thursday, and if there are concerns with that second egress, maybe that would be the time to broach that with them and ask the questions. So. There's also let me check. And there's also a preliminary plat associated with that. So there was a larger development plan identified for that site with smaller lots and different roads. So we're replatting it into one lot, so that it kind of changes the way that the project moves forward. So again, you'll see the preliminary and final site development plan and then the preliminary plat on that.
Okay.
Number 9, rezoning from C3 to R6. This is the final consideration for the apartments out south of 29th, west of 13. Associated with that is a preliminary plat, a preliminary and final plat, actually, I believe. Final plat, I'm sorry. We've been trying to clean up some of our zoning maps, and when developments come in, we like to get a legal description for the property so that it carries one zoning district. Right now, our maps are not property line, are parcel specific, so you could own a parcel that has 2 zoning districts on it. From a real estate perspective and a legal perspective, that gets really difficult. So what we try to do is ensure that when lots are developed, that they carry one zoning classification. So we've asked that the developer come back and plat the property into 2 lots. So the north lot would be the lot that's got the mixed use development project that we've kind of talked about in the past. Barry Smith and his group are developing. And then the south lot would be the additional multifamily development properties. Does that make sense? I don't want to just gloss over it, but so this lot will carry the commercial zoning, and this will carry the R5 zoning, R6 zoning. We'll probably bring more of those to you in the past.
Well, this then will be like neighborhood shops and stuff, right?
On the C3, that's what they're trying to
That's what they're.
accommodate.
That's
It's zone C3, so in a mixed-use building. So I don't want to say that it's going to be neighborhood shops. It could be something different
It's
than
not
that.
going to be 3 dentists, or whatever.
Yeah, I think they're trying to market to the density that's out there. Yep.
Is this the one where the 2 individuals came in and spoke to keeping that as a mixed use rather than?
Correct. Yeah, we've received correspondence, and there was quite a large group that came to the Planning Commission. I don't think there was a lot of conversation. A couple people maybe
There were
at the
two-
public hearing
that
2 meetings ago
I recall.
on this. Yeah. The final items are kind of all related, and they really cover from about 11 to 15. Not final, because Kesha's going to come up and talk a little bit about RVs. I know you're sitting on your edge of your seat, talk about this. But items, well, let's talk about item number 11 is regarding a public hearing for the sale of city-owned property. This is related to the Lebeda site. This project, as you know, is coming out of the ground. I think they're putting the brick on today. I'm kind of excited to see how the brick looks. I don't know if anybody else has been following that project.
Yes.
So, 7th Avenue property, you can see the buildings are, the first building going up is here. Parking, the darker parking area is the parking that'll go in with the first addition. The long-range plan is a larger project with a second building and additional egress through the site to access 6th Avenue. As the council's aware, we own the property south. It's the old railroad right-of-way that we purchased several years ago. The property that's hatched in red is the area that we're proposing to provide for the developer as a part of the project. This is outside of the right-of-way that we need for 6th Avenue extension. The blue area is right-of-way along 7th Avenue that we will get at such time the property is final platted. So once the project is built, this piece is basically sold to the developer. There'll be a final plat that'll come in, and we will get this dedicated as a part of the final plat. So it's really a land exchange. At this point, though, this property in red is going to be provided to the developer for the project. I identified in my staff report that the estimated value of that's about $11,300, and that's based on the appraisal that we've received for additional property within the area.
How much?
11,000. Recent appraisals have come back, and I'll talk about this in a second on the other property. For the railroad property that is does not have public access and limited size, it's low. It has had environmental issues. I think in this location we had some remediation as well. So the value on that is not carrying a very high mark. It's about a $1.65, which was a little surprising to us, but that's where the appraisals came through. So
This is land that is not going to be needed for 6th Avenue,
correct,
and essentially the city would be exchanging it for right-of-way on 7th Avenue.
correct. Yep,
Plus $11,000.
$11,000.
What's the appraised value of the right-of-way?
The right-of-way, we did not do an appraisal on this small piece, but what we are looking at doing, and as a part of the development agreement, we would provide for this $11,000 in the development agreement. So from the perspective of a benefit, the property that's being developed has a large plume on it, environmental contamination. As a part of that project, they're required to put in ductile iron piping, and they're incurring costs associated with the brownfield that's on that site. So they've got increased cost. So as a part of the development package, it's kind of on hold right now because of the TIF legislation. We're having some problems getting into the TIF development agreements to come through until our attorneys kind of take a look at what we need to do to ensure we don't get ourselves in trouble because of recent court cases. But we'll ensure that this value is incorporated into the tax incentive for the project. So while we're gifting the ground as a part of this, the value will be identified within the project. So,
Tom, can you explain to me, just as an educational, please give me the very brief version of this, but the adjacent properties on this, am I understanding this correctly, we don't have the easement on the north side of these properties, so we're going to have to acquire each one of these as we go either direction? Now, the car wash next door, do we not have that easement already? I'm trying to understand
why we do it
what it
sometimes
is
and
that
not
we
others.
don't own already. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of these properties were never platted. So they were never lot one of something addition. They were just a parcel from years ago. As property is platted, we get right-of-way dedications. So that's why you'll see sometimes, what's a good example of that? Indian Creek Road, I think, was another one where we had accepted right-of-way and then went back in and had to split out the right-of-way, and then we actually had leftover pieces. And so we do acquisition plats and plats of surveys to clean up those right-of-ways. It's probably not a great example, but there are areas where if you look at the right-of-way map, you'll see a jog in the right-of-way. And that's because those lots where it jets out have never been final platted.
So like if we compare them to agriculture, you just basically go pin to pin and that's the line. Here, if I'm understanding it correctly, I just want to make sure. So on these older lots that we have, because at one time these were more agriculture, so we don't have an easement. They own their property literally up to the curb of the road. Is that right?
In this instance, they do.
Okay.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so we're now pulling that back to get that easement. Now, do we have any islands in between here? I mean, so for example, at the car wash, Burger King, are those all still? Do we not have any easements on those either?
You mean right-of-way, not...
I'm sorry, right of ways. Thank you.
West of here, I think we're pretty good for quite a while. I'd have to look at the map to be sure.
Okay.
I know Marion Iron was never platted as well, and so the property line is here with Marion Iron. So it'll jog here again, but I believe on the west side we have it. So right now the property line comes up here, jogs out, and goes straight. So if we wanted to put a sidewalk in,
Okay.
we wouldn't even have the right-of-way for the sidewalk right now. So
Yeah,
if
it's
you
just
go,
that where the road sits, it's the actual right-of-way, and
Yeah.
when plats when land is platted, the city usually tries to get additional right-of-way for expansion or sidewalks or whatever, so. Since there's
That's
been
what I
no
thought.
process.
Thank you very much for that
No problem.
clarification.
And not to belabor the issue, but you know, when we do the master streets plan and we set how big a right-of-way is compared to the street classification, so when a project comes to you guys in a preliminary plat, and we say this is a collector street, this is a residential street, and this is an arterial street, we reference back to that plan document that's approved by the council, which tells us how much ground that we require as a part of the dedication. So the developer will plat a residential subdivision. If he has a collector, an arterial, and a residential street, we would need 60 feet for the residential, 80, I think, is what we do for collector, and we may need 100 for the major arterial. So that way there's a reference to why we need what, and it's not just staff coming in saying we need 100 feet. So there's a long-range plan and a process to develop what that right-of-way width is. So it's a good question. I don't think.
And obviously that coordinates obviously with expansion and growth and whether or not it may potentially be an arterial and maybe not today. So obviously, because we know how a lot of these streets are laid out. North 10th would be an example of that.
Exactly.
For future growth. Okay, thank you. Sorry to take you off
No,
your
no, that's
schedule,
no
but
problem.
that helps a lot.
No.
Is a sidewalk going in front of that?
Yes. Yes. We may. I don't know that there was. I don't recall it being deferred, but I can't imagine that we did. But we like to do them in longer lengths, but I think we did require it go in. But we'd like to see it connected in front of Marion Iron as a project comes in, because I think, Dan, what was the distance on it?
It's not very far, but the sidewalk goes from the west of this property to the west, and once we build a roundabout, it'll come up to the east, except for a short spot right there. So we wanted it to go in to complete that network. So
It wasn't very far in front of Marion Iron, so now all of a sudden you'll have a sidewalk connection all along that corridor.
That would look a lot nicer anyway through the whole project, so
Yeah.
might as well connect it.
Yeah, and the utilities should be coming down out of there shortly, right? That'll change the way that area looks tremendously.
Very nice.
So, any questions on that? I know there's a lot of things going on with these sites, and they are going to be fairly complicated as we move through these. So every time the city sells property, we have to hold a public hearing, set date, sale, so on and so forth. So. And again, we're talking about the corridor 12 through 15 are all kind of related. This is a little different situation. This property was platted, and so when we needed additional right-of-way, we're required to go in and identify that location, have it appraised. It is a substantial piece that's coming off the front of the property. For location purposes, this is the old Prince Ag site. So 7th Avenue, St. Luke's, Drugtown is here. This is the existing 7th Avenue right-of-way. The hatched area is the expanded 7th Avenue south into the Prince Ag piece that we need to acquire for the 7th Avenue improvements. The highlighted area here, identified as Plata Survey 2054, is the property that the city owns, and that's the former railroad right-of-way. So this is the land exchange we've been talking about. At the last meeting, we had purchase agreements on the table regarding them. So essentially, we need this, they want to acquire that. We had an appraisal done that set that 165 a square on the backside. This too has an environmental cap on it, so there's an area within there that if they disturb, they got to do additional remediation. There's land use restrictions on this property, they're nothing residential, so there is a no further action letter, but those are some of the requirements as a part of that. So it's not necessarily your pristine piece of commercial property. That being said, we were a little surprised at the 165 value, but I mean, that's what the appraisers say. That's kind of how it rolls. Property on the front. This is obviously commercial property adjacent to a 4-lane roadway, which is carrying a higher value. It's about $16 a square. So I think I established within the memo the pricing on it, but what we're doing as a part of the project, or what we're doing on Thursday would be providing for the parcels to be created. So we're approving this acquisition plat. It's actually this is the acquisition plat. We have a separate plat of survey, which is this property that's highlighted in purple. So those both need to be approved. We are setting the date for the public hearing on the sale of city-owned property, similar to what the Mooney project was. And then we're also going to acquire a temporary construction easement over the site. If I don't have the signature on that, that'll pull that off the agenda for the next meeting. So actually, I do anticipate that not being completed by Thursday, so we'll probably pull that off. That being said, just so the council is aware, Dan had indicated the building was coming down on this site, the same location. The project is continuing out there, and they're doing the road improvements out there. You can actually see the roundabout graded out on the old Marion Iron site if you go out and look at it. So they need to get in there, and they've actually secured a hold harmless with contractor to do that demo work. And it's Genesis Equity who's doing the project out there. So they've got to hold harmless with the owner, which is GLD Properties. So you'll see some work starting. We won't have the temporary construction easement probably completed, but they have one from the owner, and the contractor is willing to move forward with that. So any questions on that? That was a lot of information, I know.
What's going to get built there?
This property is the location where Brownfield Grayfield tax credit was provided for a hotel, $1 million tax credit project. So we've been working with them trying to figure out if that's going to be a go or no go. So
Seems like, these, obviously we're moving a lot of this land around, but there's a lot of variables, and I know I appreciate your explanation, because there's an immense amount of details going into this, where square footage value is not as attractive on the backside as the front side, and so to make these swaps, there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes on that. I just want you to know that it's appreciated. So,
well, and thank you. I appreciate that. I do try to provide all the information I can, and sometimes as you find out these once projects start rolling, they get a little momentum. So that's why all of a sudden we're sitting here with a acquisition plat and a plat of survey and easements and everything all at once. I did put in the memo some of the values. So the city on the appraisal for this piece was $370,73, so $370,073. This piece, which is larger but is the lower lands, came in at $184,716. We did make sure to reserve an easement through the property. We didn't prescribe it where. We just set a 30-foot easement to provide for a trail within this area. So I think the developers are a little uncomfortable with just where is that going to go? I'm trying to, and it may come through that maybe we do it as agreeable at such time the property's developed or something like that. But we just want to make sure that we have the ability to get a trail from one end of the property to the other. We really don't care where it goes necessarily. So
we don't have that alignment already determined?
No, we don't. No, and we would rather incorporate it into an overall development, opposed to specifically identify that it has to go here or there. So if they brought in a project with a building, if we said here right down the middle, that might limit the project. If we came on the south edge, that would be fine, but maybe they have some configuration that would work better. So we're pretty open to that, I think.
I would think, too, as a developer, you'd want a little bit of that flexibility, because it's going to make it a little bit more of a marketable piece of property. Because if we come in and set our pins and said this is where it's going to go, if that building ain't going to work, that person's out. So having that little bit of flexibility is going to make it different on the developer coming in and taking a look at that piece of property.
How much lower did that appraise than you anticipated it to be?
I don't know, maybe a couple bucks. Lon, I don't know what you think, but what were we thinking, $4 or $5? Yeah, so this property does not have public access, though. until the roundabout's built, and then when it does, it's pretty low. So, I mean, and again, we're not really seeing all the transactions, so, you know, we leave it to the guys that do it for a living to provide that value. But
Well, this one's got a capped site literally almost right in the middle of it, right in the heart of where you normally would have prime development properties. So, you know, that's pretty much going to have to be a parking lot on top of that. You can't put building foundations or water or sewer through that specific spot. So once you take that into account, I think that really hurt the value of it.
Okay.
any questions on that? All right. Kesha Billings is going to come up and give a little presentation on the RV ordinance. Do you know, can you switch this to the, yeah.
I'll let the city charge my computer.
What's it called, Kesha?
2016.
Ta-da.
Good job.
There you go.
Good afternoon. After I'm going to talk briefly, hopefully briefly, about recreational vehicle parking, and then Dave is going to follow that with regular vehicle parking in the front yard. So there's a couple different conversations, but it all deals with parking on people's property. So what I'm going to talk about is recreational vehicle parking. And so what is considered recreational vehicles? From staff's perspective, this is all defined in the ordinance. I provided in your staff reports the ordinance from 2013 that was proposed, got voted down by council. So at that point, we were looking at recreational vehicles as anything as aircraft, limo bus, motorhome, pop-up camper, travel trailer, truck camper, utility trailer, watercraft and associated trailers, fifth wheel trailers, every kind of camper you could think of is included in here, and other items. And so the parking ordinance history, as I alluded to in the staff report, this was originally brought up in 2013. A gentleman was neighbor to a large RV, a large fifth wheel RV, parked very close to his home, right in between two homes that protruded out from the front of the, from in front of the house. And he had called, or not necessarily called, wrote a letter to the city council. Staff looked into it, and in the end, council wanted more information. So some of the things that were discussed during meetings, during staff conversation with council, is allowed size of the recreational vehicles, location on a residential property where we'd allow those, kind of a grandfathered period or a delay in staff enforcement of those, allowing people to become aware of the ordinance and its existence, the cost to store vehicles off-site, and the desire for a citizen survey feedback that was in the council minutes looked back through those, saw voting for and against, and some of the reoccurring things were, well, I'd like to understand where this comes from a citizen's perspective. Are people generally for it, against it, so on and so forth. And so I included this in your staff packets as well. The 2014 citizen survey results, specific to the large vehicles, front side of residential properties, restricting those. 59%, almost 60% agreed with some sort of restriction on that. About 25% disagreed, and then no opinion had the 15%ers in there that didn't really want to say. But so that gives you some information. Yes, we did look into it. No, it wasn't brought back immediately, but again, every year, Tom takes a handful of calls, I take a handful of calls, Dave takes a handful of calls as far as what can I do to limit where my neighbor is able to put their large RV camper in their yard. And so just bringing it back up again with Ms. Smith's letter at the beginning of June that was received and filed. And so when I talk about required yard setbacks, and I wonder, yeah, so you can see, so where the mouse is over this red area, and so if the house is here and the driveway is fronting this street that runs up and down, and then over here you have the tan house that fronts the street that goes east and or side to side, and so the required red area is the required front yard. Typically, a front yard setback in any R2 zoning district, single family lot, is going to be 25 foot. And so that is where the front of the house or the front of the garage door has to be set back from the property lines. And that's usually roughly where the sidewalk is. And so this is maybe not true and accurate as far as where the street is and where the property lines are, but there's that area in front of the house is considered the front yard. Now, this area in blue that runs along the side of the houses that is adjacent to the neighboring street, that's considered the corner side yard. It's not technically a interior side yard because it has that frontage on the street. And then these green areas are considered your internal side yard setback. So typically on a single family lot, you're looking at probably a 25-foot setback on the front, a 12-foot setback on the corner side yard, and 7-foot side yard setback on the internal side lot line. And so everybody up to snuff on kind of where we're at with side yard setbacks. So looking at these, and so staff's recommendation is prohibiting parking in the required front yard area and the required corner side yard area. So basically the yards that are adjacent to streets. And so a house mid-block has no corner side yards. They're just looking at internal side yard setbacks. And we would recommend that this apply to all recreational vehicles. And now this is obviously a point for discussion today, but and then enforcement, this is what we stressed before, it would be by citizen complaint. We are not out to look for more work for ourselves just by canvassing areas. We deal with all of our recreational vehicle parking on non-hard surface. It's all by complaint. Some items for discussion though, what I'm looking for from council is restrictions on height and length. And so currently there's none. You can have as big a camper as you want and as long a camper as you want, so long as it's on hard surface. In 2013, the draft wording was a 17-foot maximum, and so that would be limited to a pop-up camper or boat, decent smaller size boat, probably fishing boat, but to that kind of extent. Once you get into travel trailers and fifth wheel campers, they do get, smaller ones are 20 foot. Your bigger ones are going to be 35. So I'll walk through these and then I'll kind of bring it back around for discussion. Setbacks on internal side yard setbacks. So that's going to be typically from the house is going to be 7 foot from the lot line. Currently there's none. If you've got enough room to fit your camper in between, up, right up to the property line, you can put it in there. In 2013, the way it was a minimum of 3 foot from the side lot line, and then it was for a below a 6-foot camper. So basically, again, you'd be looking at like a boat or a pop-up trailer. If it was 3 foot in from the side lot line, you could put it in there so long as it met that height requirement. For every 2 foot it got higher, the setback increased. And so say you had a 14-foot tall trailer, which is a very tall trailer, it would be required to be in that 7 foot. And so it got a little, looking back at it, it's a little kind of how to calculate that when and where. And so that's something that we're willing to, definitely bring back to the table to make it all easier for everybody to understand. The next one is 3 foot minimum side or setback in the rear yard. And again, currently there's none. And in 2013, it was kind of a step, the higher the vehicle, the further it had to be set back. So interesting, if that's something that you wanted to go, just 3 foot minimum behind the house, that'd be fine. Grandfathering period, right now there's none, but 2013, the draft was 18 months to give, at that time it was a spring discussion as well, to give people 2 summers, 2 seasons, 2 camping seasons to be able to park their recreational vehicles on an approved hard surface, but that, in their front yard. And then after that, then staff would start taking enforcement calls. And the limit on the number of recreational vehicles, currently there's none. If you have a utility trailer, a camper, a boat, I don't know, you could have every type of camper you wanted in your backyard so long as they were on approved hard surfaces. In 2013, the draft was limiting to 2 recreational vehicles on your property. Even if they met all of the setback, out of the front yard, out of the corner side yard, they were in your backyard on approved hard surface, you'd still only be allowed to have 2. So anybody want to talk about, staff's recommendation, not in the front yard or the corner side yard, applies to all recreational vehicles, doesn't matter the size. And then other items for discussion, height and length. Are you looking at the smaller it is, that's fine, or?
Kesha, could you show a couple pictures? I just wanted the council to, it gives a better visual when you see some of the, one of the things that we struggle with is, if someone has a little John boat sitting beside their garage, that's one thing, but the complaint that drove the issue before was a 30-plus foot fifth wheel trailer parked along the house, property line to garage wall, and then the nose of the fifth wheel sticking out into the front yard, probably 10 or 15 feet. So there's a pretty varying difference between a pop-up and a John boat and a fifth wheel and a...
This is the one that, so this is literally out this gentleman's second story window. This is what he got to see. So this, the street is over along this side. So, and then when he walked out of his front door, when he would look to the, I think it was east, this is what he would see. And so, this is a fifth wheel. In a car, you could probably see past that, but on a travel trailer, the camper comes clear down to the hitch. That, you could still park it there. Per our code right now, as long as the pad that this camper is sitting on, wedged in between the 2 houses, as long as that is hard surfaced, it's allowed. And so this is the original complaint from 2013. And then, if I can find the, this is the, sorry, it's not in color, but you can see in this instance, this is the most recent one that was brought to our attention. If that, no matter how you park it on your property, as long as it's on a hard surface today, it would be allowed. So if they wanted to pour a concrete pad in front of their house and block the entire you have camper door and then 2 garage doors. So if you wanted flat panel on your front of your house, that'd be the way to do it. So a couple other things. So I don't know the size of those campers, but this is one of the campers that we looked at back in 2013. This is a 25 foot, so a little bit of perspective. This is roughly about a 25-foot camper, and so this is one of the smaller ones. Trying to think here. You can't see too well. One that would be allowed, technically, per our kind of recommendations here, is this is a corner side lot, so a corner lot, and so you have street along this side, street along this side, and so this area, what I discussed before, this would be the area in the hashed blue. This would be your corner side yard, and so this would be your 12-foot. And so per what I've just kind of talked about, if you restricted it in the front yard and you restricted it in the corner side yard, this would actually be a legal parking pad if there were no size requirements. So, looking at their backyard, they would be able to park basically anywhere in this area if there were no size requirements, and if you could park up to 3 feet away from your anywhere behind the house would be 3 foot, or anything from the back property line would be that 3 foot.
Ashley, can I crack this one open? What are the complaints that we're getting? Is it the aesthetics to the front yard? I mean, this one here, by my opinion, perfect. It's set back. It's pleasing. It's not obstructing anyone else's view. It's not part of the front yard, front lawn. What are the complaints that we're getting back? I think I know what they are, but can you just give me some feedback? Is it the side-to-side adjacent properties? The trailers are sticking out. They can't see out. They can't see around. It's a nuisance to the neighborhood.
Yes.
Am I catching them all?
Yes.
So in my day job, I do understand how these trailers are manufactured. The manufacturers also have a ratio, the height versus length. The longer they get, the taller they get. And so if you've noticed these going down the road, these 40-footers now have, slide outs on both sides. You don't have to bend over to get into the bunk up front anymore. You can stand up perfectly tall. So it has a 6-foot height with a 6-foot overhead in it. It puts it about 12 to 13 feet in the air, which your pictures illustrated that perfectly. I mean, it's just as they're building them bigger, they're getting longer and they're getting taller. I hate the fact that this topic has to come up with new counsel all the time, and it's coming back around and around and around, and it's more and more people, the baby boomers and the younger generations, everybody's wanting to do it. There's more and more campers out there, so more and more phone calls are coming in. I totally get this. But with the expenses of campers needs to come accommodations for their storage. And so I understand that as well too. When you're dealing with something that's going to cost you $50 to $100 a month to store it, that needs to be calculated into that, especially if your neighborhood's not conducive for storing such an item like this. Councilmember Joe is going to say, your home is your castle. I get that. So is mine, and mine's right next door to yours. So everybody's got those legitimate concerns and complaints. So I'm right on board with the people that are complaining about these things to the degree. So like you said, if there was a way to run our formula that says if it's going to be more than 30 feet, we know it's going to be over 10 feet high. So there's that ratio. It's not going to be the John boat parked, along the side that isn't creating that nuisance hanging out over the front. But some of these are getting. I've driven, you take a look at our older section of the neighborhood up here, these ranch homes, these campers, these fifth wheels are taller than their houses are, parking up next to them. So,
and one thing that we tried to do when we wrote the ordinance wasn't to be, overly burdensome, because there's a substantial amount of people that have them, but at the same time respect, a lot of it comes down to the neighborhood. I mean, I'm going to say most people can drive down a neighborhood, a street, and if they see one that's obtuse, it's very visible. It's not the guy that just has the jet ski in his side yard that's a question. It's the It's the larger vehicles. So that's what we tried to address with the ordinance. Just so the council is aware, and I mean, we're bringing this back at the request of the council for review of the ordinance. You know, clearly we wanted this council to understand what was being proposed at the time. That's why Kesh is bringing up the idea that these are all the items that were included. If there's questions or comments or desires for things to change, things can relax, things can get stiffer, whatever really is the desire. You know, we're just bringing it back. Just from a neighborhood planning perspective, I do feel that doing something would be a good idea, especially with the size of the campers that we're seeing. That being said, it's certainly up to the council on how we proceed with this. We just wanted to make sure that you guys were up to speed on where we were and what happened before. When we did this before, I think we had over 150 people at the meeting. I would say a majority of them were against any regulations because there's been investments throughout the community for concrete pads and pouring of, you know, the pads, the storage, all that stuff. Some people have even accessory buildings that they've built that they put them in. So I think that's just so there's an awareness that was quite a public hearing.
Does the ordinance address that, accessory buildings?
I think if the accessory building can be built in accordance with our code, then they can do that, yeah.
What about if you had the restrictions, would you have temporary, like, would you allow temporary storage, like over a weekend or whatever, you know? In my prior neighborhood where I lived, there was one of these big ones, but they, you know, they stored it off-site, but then they, you know, would bring it to the house the weekend they wanted to use it. You know, it'd be there for overnight or a couple days, and then they would use it, and then it would be back for a couple days, and then they'd put it back in storage.
In the ordinance from 2013, it allowed a 72-hour period for loading and unloading on the property, not necessarily on the street. On the
I think that would have to be accommodated.
48 hours.
Kind of use.
As long as it meets a certain width and length requirement, then it's 48. We often get people coming in, calling in, and we'll take discretionary. We'll use it. Fire trucks and everybody can clear through it. Play nicely.
I just have a kind of question about the hard surface. Does that add to our stormwater issues?
Nope.
Yeah, someone could pave their entire backyard to store all their stuff on it, and then
Anytime you add impervious surface is going to add to our stormwater runoff. In a residential area, however, they pay a flat fee basically, so it would not change their fee to the city as far as cost-wise.
I was just wondering if it could be not hard surface, you know, if that's an option.
We do get requests for that. I promise, you know, my neighbor won't maintain his, but I promise I will maintain mine. Well, we can't guarantee that you're not going to move out in 2 years and the next guy's never going to mow or try and take care of any of the weeds. You know, if we could have gravel and have, you know, less impervious surface, we would allow that. But unfortunately, the maintenance on a hard surface is guaranteed more so than gravel or brick.
If we don't do anything this go around, I'd like to at least see no parking in the front yard.
In the corner side yard? Is that?
I don't know, maybe one step at a time, I don't know.
And that would go for all vehicles? So any boat, any utility trailer, so like contractor trailer?
car.
All those vehicles that you had mentioned.
Dave will get to cars. So cars and trucks, all licensed vehicles, are a whole other topic. And so, does anybody have any warm fuzzies about smaller utility, you know, recreational vehicles, or all are in the same category?
I'll just say that my next door neighbor has a fifth wheel in his driveway. You know, I open my blinds in my bedroom window and look out my window, I see his trailer. But I don't have any issues with it. I like it being there. It's a wind block. It blocks snow drifting into my yard, And instead of me looking out and seeing in his living room, I'm looking out and seeing his camper, which is totally fine with me.
And you can run around in your...
Well, I'm not going to go there. But his trailer also, it's a one stall driveway, but his trailer, it's a big one, but it sits behind the front of his house. So you don't see it when you're trying to back out or anything. So there's no issues with it. So let me ask you this. When you say 3 foot minimum setback, or no, setback for the internal side yard, 3 foot minimum, is that from the concrete surface or from the trailer itself?
Well, concrete surface would be the trailer itself, most likely. I mean, they could pave
Trailer's
up to
in
their
a
property
foot.
line, yeah,
Off the concrete?
yeah. So right now, the corner side yard and then the front yard requirement are easy enough to say, here's the front of the house, here's the side of the house, don't go beyond that. The internal lot line, the internal side yard is one of those things, if you're okay with it, as long as it doesn't go beyond the front of the house and it's tucked in between the two houses, is that fine? Or would you rather allow two properties to enjoy, that 14 foot of open space in between the houses and then push it back behind the house before you get close to the house again?
But see, I don't even know if his driveway is 3 foot from my property line. Just because in 1950s homes, So
and this is where we are only interested in taking it on a complaint basis.
Right, but what if someone
Just
across
wanna
the
put
street
that out there.
complains about it, and
Right.
the two property owners side by side, neither one of them have an issue? Well, it got complained about, but the people who are actually affected by it,
And
are
so
totally
it's,
fine with it.
restricting in the front and corner side yard, and then having a 3 foot setback from all other yards, may serve that purpose for the most part. Otherwise we could restrict it in the internal side yard as well. That wouldn't necessarily help your neighbor out, but that's just one way to, by having that 3 foot setback on the internal side yard as well, a lot of properties don't have enough room to have a camper and then that 3 foot. So I mean, you'd be eliminating a lot of those just by creating that additional setback. Is anybody interested in, so the next one down is the grandfathering kind of period of letting them get through the rest of this camping season, rest of next camping season, and then, so summer of 2018 is when we'd start taking enforcement calls? Or is that something you feel that come, if it's approved September, October, by the time that it makes its way through planning and zoning and then the council, is that something start enforcing this October?
Just a comment on that. I think most of the grandfathering questions came to where people had poured side yards or pads in the rear yard or hadn't or something of that nature. To me, it's just my opinion, but I guess it would be more of a recommendation that front yard definitely would need to be, I think that should be addressed as soon as possible. Maybe not the night of the ordinance, but give a 3-month or a 6-month or something. But I personally think the neighborhoods are, if you got a large trailer sitting in the front yard, I don't think that that's being a respectful neighbor. That's my personal view, but I think it also, from a professional perspective, there's a reason there's a setback, and that setback is supposed to be free and clear and provide a visual clearance down the front of the property so that when you drive down the street you can see ahead. And so if you park a large trailer like that in the front consistently, that's really out of character for a neighborhood.
And then
The
also,
citizen survey was after the
Yes.
last.
Yep, so 2014. So all of the discussion on RVs happened March, April of 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And
Then
so
you had the
2014,
citizen
the
survey.
citizen survey. Yep.
Okay.
And I guess not to interrupt Kesh's presentation, but the idea was we wanted to bring it forward tonight, let you guys know what had happened, update you on the ordinance. Clearly this is the council's direction, or to proceed. We don't have to get into all the nitty gritty tonight. You guys got a copy of the ordinance. Maybe take a look at it, mark it up. Feel free to call us with questions if you want. If it's not something you want to do now, or if you want to wait till fall, or it's completely up to the council. If you don't want to do anything, that's fine too. But we were just wanting to get it back in front of you after you requested it. So I don't know if there was anything we were specifically looking for to solve tonight, but there is. From your guys' perspective, we're happy to do that. But
I think it's something that we need to address. Obviously, we're going to be coming into the fall season again, so we're going to be looking at late season camping, winterizing, things of that nature, and these things are going to be coming home, to rest for the winter again. But I think I would like to review it a little bit. I think we still need to address it.
I agree.
It's a difficult deal. It's got to take a look at the overall picture, though, I guess. We got, like you said, we had 100 and some people in council, but we got 36,000 people that are calling in with concerns with it, so we got to address it.
I will draft up some changes, maybe a little less restrictive than were proposed before. Some of the same allowances for loading and unloading. I'll draft something up. So tweak the
I think my biggest issue, I guess the objective I want to hit is the complaints I'm getting is them hanging out in the front yard. I know we got some problems with side-to-side houses from adjacent properties, but the big one is that hanging out 20, 25 feet from the front of the house that's blocking the entire neighborhood, and it's parked there year-round, and those are the complaints that I'm getting. I don't know if that's what you're getting too. I hate to just blanket this whole thing with, some cities just don't have anything sitting outside, period, end of story. That's their ordinance. Some of the neighborhoods are all developing those in their covenants. As these new developments are being done, covenants are very restrictive. They don't even allow any utility trailers, boats, anything that's labeled as a recreational vehicle by the state of Iowa is to be permitted outside of the premises. So I hate to swing that pendulum in the complete opposite direction, but I think we gotta address these units that are hanging out there. We restrict that on the houses, and yet we got somewhat of a permanent part-time structure that's sitting there doing the same thing. So we got to address those.
Okay.
One thing I was going to say, the height and the length, my opinion, I don't think there should be any restriction on size of the vehicle or the recreational vehicle if it, let's say, sits behind the front of the house. Or what was the other one I was going to... Oh, are you getting complaints about more than 2 recreational vehicles in someone's yard or in their property? Is that a big complaint?
No.
Do we need to have a limit?
Typically not. The thing is, if it's one not parked on a hard surface, it's
Even more than so
right. But
maybe they don't. Maybe
we take care of them all in one complaint. We just
Sure.
Kind of write the letter, say get everything on a hard surface.
Maybe we don't need to limit people to how many recreational vehicles they can store if they store them correctly, and we don't have to limit on the size if they store them correctly. I think a grandfathered period is fine to have in there for, just like we did with the no smoking in the parks type of thing. So don't enforce it for so many. So
and
long.
just to clarify, the 3-foot minimum setback for a rear
yeah.
yard or internal side yard, that would be the setback of any detached structure. So if you wanted to build a 2-stall garage in your backyard, you'd only have to put it 3 foot. For fire purposes, 5. But from our standpoint, if you wanted to go the extra mile and do the fireproofing measures, you could be as close as 3 foot. So that's how we arrived at that 3-foot number. If we wanted to have a setback, a smaller setback, that's what we'd arrive at.
That's another thing I was going to say too, as far as your minimum setback based off the height of the vehicle. I don't agree with that one either. I think it should just be one set number and not depending on the size. So if it's a 3 foot for every vehicle, not if it's 20 foot high or 10 foot high or 5 foot high.
Okay.
Standard size.
Okay, so having
Thoughts?
beaten this horse as much as possible, I will move on to Dave's discussion of vehicle parking in the front yard.
Just to follow up with that, if you guys have specific, like you got the copy, if you want to redline it, that would be very helpful for us so that we can kind of, you know, or if you have just pencil marks or questions, feel free to forward them to us via email or whatever, and then we can kind of incorporate it into something, and maybe we can bring it back for a discussion item prior to making.
I was going to say, is this going to be on Thursday? Are we going to do anything on Thursday? No.
No,
Okay.
no. That was not the intention anyway.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Cars. I have this on my street. Cars parked in front yards. Not mine.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry this didn't make it in the packet. Kind of worked on it today. This was building on kind of Kesh's presentation, but completely different. As part of that initial citizen request from back in May, it was an issue. I was started with it. Camper in the front yard. I went out and I enforced the code. Got to get on a hard surface. Put it on the driveway, get rid of it, or store it someplace, or pave your front yard and park it legally, which was allowed by code. The person that made the initial complaint, she didn't like that answer at all because she wanted it gone, but the code does allow these things to be there currently. So when she came back in with her initial or her second follow-up, I think, to the city council, she wanted to look at parking, not necessarily parking in the front yard, but paving your front yard. How much can you pave? And the council then directed us to do a little research on it and present back, so that's what I'm doing today. Currently, city code, as I stated, allows you to pave the entire front yard if you'd like, from property line to property line, back to the house. Thankfully, we don't have any of that situation in residential construction. I mean, there are a few examples I threw in the packet there that do illustrate some of the more paved front yards in the community, and I'm just familiar with these because these are the ones I drive by in my daily comings and goings, so I'm familiar with these sites. I'm sure there's several others out there, but it's not a problem that's running rampant in the community. So what I did is I did a real brief search trying to find communities that did regulate paving in the front lawn. Found a few just in a few hours. Most of them regulated on if you have 60 feet as a percentage, between 25 and 50%. The communities kind of range. So if you have a 100 foot lot in the front, you could pave 25 feet of it or 50 feet of it, whatever that percentage was, is what some communities were doing. But all of a sudden, having to figure out a percentage for the homeowner, that can be tough. What's 25% of 66 feet? So some communities said, no, let's not do that. Let's just give them a blanket 10 or a blanket 12. That was kind of the range I found, additional to what the driveway is. So you get your driveway, of course, from street to your garage door. Then you get an additional 10 or 12. Some communities didn't care which side of the garage you put them on. You put them on the house side or you put them on the neighbor's side of the house, the side yard side. Some communities required it to be on the side yard side, not in front of your house. So what we're talking about is this type of situation. These are all Marion homes. Paving for a variety of reasons. I think most of them, if you've got a bunch of 14, 15-year-old kids at home, you got a lot of cars, including mom and dads. So that's a common situation. I mean, these are all, again, I think likely a lot of the same. Here's a single stall garage, 4 cars, maybe visitors, maybe kids. The problem with not allowing parking, you get this situation, car over the driveway or car over the sidewalk. Not going to affect most people. You get people that are less mobility bound, kids on bicycles, that's a hazard. Car should be moved. But those are just some of the situations around town. And it's all parts of the community. It's not just one part of the community. I mean, you get homes that have significant parts of the front yard. This was a unique situation way back in the day, but they may want a second driveway out. You're getting a lot of parking. a recent duplex kind of behind the old Subway that's closed. This duplex, I mean, you almost got the entire front yard paved situation. Aesthetically, I mean, I don't feel it's pleasing. Professionally, I don't think it's pleasing to have everything paved. There's a certain percentage that should be looked at. Kind of a more, this is an extreme example, but it's still probably what we see most of, is the pouring the pad beside the garage. Again, this has got trailer storage, which is not part of this discussion, but it gives you the storage of 2 teenage cars, so you and your wife can park in the garage still and make them scoop the snow. So this is a common situation. This is quite a bit larger than the 10 or 12 feet as one option, but a lot of communities I looked at, I couldn't find anything regulating it. And I was doing Cedar Valley metro area, Des Moines metro area, Sioux City area. Some communities did, some communities didn't. The ones that did have regulations on the book, they were either percentage or they were a hard 10, 12 feet extra allowed. If you're looking for a recommendation, what I'm looking for is direction. Is it something you want to pursue to limit the amount of paving in the front yard? I'll bring back a couple different scenarios and bring back the best case, I think. If the direction's not, then we can anticipate more people doing it. Again, it's not widespread. I was familiar with 5 or 6 just from the community where I drive, but it does occur.
Is it really a problem?
It's a problem when I get it's only the problem for the people that call. I've gotten called on every single one of those I showed you.
So they call you because somebody has too much concrete in their front yard?
Somebody's paving their entire front yard. It looks like a parking lot. And that's the complaint.
See, that doesn't bother me. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it doesn't bother me as much as the recreational vehicles, the big recreational vehicles. Because to me, it's aesthetically, we all have different perceptions of what's aesthetically pleasing and not, and it's not infringing on me in any way or on the neighbor in any way. As a large recreational vehicle that's blocking view and all that to me is infringing on your neighbor.
Yeah, and this is unrelated to recreational, but it is. I mean, if you could allow all this type, you could say, yeah, you can allow all this parking, but if you still pass Kesha's ordinance that she's working on, you can pave everything, but you just can't park there with your RV. This does not affect cars or your daily drivers, I guess. But this came from the citizen, and the council directed us to look at some scenarios, and these are really the 2 I found. Percentages vary, though, so I guess I'm just looking for direction from the council if you want us to pursue it further or just focus on RVs for a while.
I think you should go with the 10 or 12. People can visualize that a little bit better than a percent. What I really have a problem with are these cars that are parking just in their grass. Like on 8th Avenue, there were 7 cars like in 2 blocks. One yard had 3 cars parked in their grass.
Yeah. And is that worse or better or worse than paving it? I'm not going to exaggerate. I think it's 90% of our calls to the planning department on complaints are people parking in the grass. And it's not unloading groceries because it's not convenient to go from the driveway. It's cars that are sitting. When you go out there, it's rutted. It's ugly. It's not only bringing their house down, it's bringing neighbors' properties down because it's a mess. It's when your RVs are stored on the grass. During the summer, you're moving those. You're keeping it mowed. It looks good. But as soon as you sit in the fall, spring, it's a weedy, muddy mess. So I think it's very important to keep stressing hard surface for parking. But again, the front yard, again, that's the council's direction, and I think some level would be advisable. I'd recommend it. What that ultimately is, I don't know yet.
Well, I definitely would approve of the hard surface rather than pulling 3 or 4 cars onto and then having 3 or 4 in the street also. And that I've seen that.
Yeah, and then this is my daily travels just don't take me into some of those parts of towns with those smaller lots, but when you have no parking or one-side parking, you do see wider driveways in those areas just because they're a 50-foot lot, no parking, lots of driveways. Where do you go with your car? They go onto the sidewalk, or they go onto the yard, and then that yard eventually unfortunately gets graveled, which is even worse. But it gets paved, and I bet they're fairly prevalent in probably some of the really core of the community. If I drove around and looked for them, I'm sure I'd find them. So
I've got two complaints going on right now where one is similar to this. I know where this house is, but it happens to be a rental property. So obviously, you know where that's coming from. So obviously, you have a rental due each and every month, and so somebody decides to let somebody else stay, and they start sharing those costs and those expenses, and before you know it, you got 4 or 5 people. I got one right next to my daily office that I'm about ready to pull my hair out on. Cars parked upside the house in the front yard, anywhere you can get a car parked, that's where they park it. The other one I have an issue that the gentleman's complaining about is they're parking cars there and then storing them there in the wintertime. So he said he's got an example like this where a guy parks a car there, puts it up on jack stands, and puts a cover over it in the wintertime. Mm-hmm. And it remains to sit there all winter long in the same spot. We use a percentage when we go to expand our house to the rear. There's a reason for that. I would be in favor of having a percentage to that front yard. That is going to somewhat restrict it. I think it's unfair to the owners, but you know, these houses are built in the 50s and 60s, and you only had one car in the household back then. You know, the per capita of cars on the road today for the household members are out there are 4 times higher than what they were in 1972. So you stop and think about that. You've got these kids driving to school with school permits at the age of 14 and a half, and they got their own car now. So there's a huge need for more parking, and some of that's going to, you know, rather than, you know, moving out of the house, they're trying to accommodate this parking. So I'm going to be in favor of some type of percentage where we don't let the parking overgrow the front, because aesthetically it changes the entire neighborhood, in my opinion. No different than how we expand houses in the back. What is our rule now? Is it 35%?
For
an extension of your home to the backyard?
No, you can expand your home as large as you like, as long as it's 25 feet from the back property line.
Okay.
Unless you got a smaller lot, and there's some.
I thought we had a percentage to backyard green
space.
Space.
As a detached, if you build a detached garage, you're only allowed to occupy 40% of the rear portion of your property.
That was the number I was looking for.
That's still, I mean, for most lots, it still gives you a 3-stall garage, which I'm not going to say is small or big, but that's well above average, or that's well above average for Marion. It is 3 stalls.
Because I think, you know, I understand where people are coming from. It's cheaper to pour a $6,000 pad of concrete than it is to move and buy another house. I totally get that, especially when the kids are growing up and moving on, and it'll be back to just 2 cars in the household again. But I know it's a growing concern because I'm dealing with them.
But not to let anybody off the hook, is there to proceed, or I guess I'm looking for some direction before I leave here tonight. Kind of got mixed here so far. So.
Yeah, I'm willing to look at it.
Yeah. I guess I don't think I have a problem with pouring more concrete for parking. I guess my only thing is, I forget who brought it up, stormwater. Maybe if someone's going to expand off of the original size of the driveway, there should be a formula to figure out how much more they have to, you know, pay in stormwater fee.
Engineering would love to work on that, I think. So.
They'll invoice for it too.
Right.
I could bring back some harder numbers based on these scenarios I've given you, and actually give you some real life examples. Maybe calculate what this one is, or a couple of others I showed you are what they would mean as percentage, or what they'd mean as a hard number. I don't want to delve a whole lot more, you know, time on this if there's really no desire to go forward. But I'm more than happy to. But I need to make sure we're.
Well, with the fact that there are so many families that are becoming blended, I mean, kids are moving back in with their parents, and the parents are moving in with their parents and all, and everybody's got 2 cars at least. I don't think you can restrict, but my concern is the parking on street.
Dave, if I might make a suggestion, you know, this is an area where I think visuals might help. So if you could take ones like this and do a little work, maybe put some cross hatching on there, show the area that they under those type of scenarios where they wouldn't have been able to pave, then the council could really see what kind of a functional impact they're talking about.
I'll bring back some real life examples at hopefully the next meeting, and then we can, or next,
Dave, can you,
and hopefully, then we can maybe make a decision where we should pursue it further.
can you just give us perspective of what kind of calls we're taking in? I mean, do we get a dozen a month, or maybe annually, maybe
I
that'd
mean,
be...
like, on like this issue, or just parking, the parking
Yeah,
issues in
well,
general?
no, this particular issue here where...
When this is being done, we are getting calls. I mean, it's usually from the immediate neighborhood. What are they doing? And and this does not take a permit, so I don't know. I have to get my car and go look at, see what they're doing, because this is not, it's no permit needed. Hey, looks like they're paving their front yard. And then the complaint is, oh, it's going to look like a parking lot. How can they do this? And code allows it. This one has some issues. I mean, this one's got some issues. I mean, the property line's probably about 2 feet from sidewalk, so they're technically poured some into the city property. That's a pretty common issue, though. I mean, no one likes the parking lot in the front yard. I mean, that's the complaint I get when this situation's happening. And it's usually on these situations. I don't take many calls on a corner like this, but if this was your neighbor's house, I do get calls about that, always asking how close can they pave up to my property line, up to it. What about the stormwater? And you're explaining that too. Well, as long as they can't affect the drainage between the houses, et cetera. And they don't like those answers, but that's what the code allows. So I'll bring back some real life examples with these images, hopefully. One other thing, I missed the first part. Did anybody else need an extra copy of the book? This is the Perry development. It was included in the packet.
Yes, I would.
And I think it was on the digital as well, but
We never got a digital.
I got a couple. Yeah, you should have had one in your hard packet though.
I didn't. No.
Okay.
Thank you.
While he's passing out, just so the council's aware, I mean, we build our streets to accommodate parking on one side of the street too. So a lot of these folks, not everywhere there is it really convenient, but the concept that we don't park on the street, I think that's where the overflow parking is supposed to go, not in your front yard. It's supposed to go in the street. We accommodate for that. I mean, we build our streets wide enough for parking. If we didn't build our streets wide enough for parking, I could see there being a little more of an issue, but clearly when you build a 26-foot street now, we do restrict parking to one side. There's a substantial amount of parking along every street. Just so the council's aware, I mean, that option does exist. So someone comes in and says, well, I can't park my car anywhere. Well, no, the public street does provide for parking.
Is there a way to get actual addresses of these homes or some of these homes so we can maybe drive by and look? Thank you.
Why don't you go around and survey all the places that park in the street, and then overnight put a parking meter there? That's
No, I make my daughter park in the street, so I don't need that.
Ready? Okay. Now, the first item under administration is a resolution to approve the City of Marion naming policy. After the council feedback on the last draft, we made a couple of changes. One is to change it so that it says that naming will generally not be made for living individuals, so that gives the council the flexibility, or library board, parks board has the flexibility to be able to approve that. And then the provision that actually said that a person must be deceased before a period of time before a facility or anything could be named after them was removed from the city-owned parks, buildings, and recreational facilities section of the policy. So just wanted to see if there's any other feedback, any other concerns council had before we bring it forward for adoption.
This isn't the revised version yet.
The one that you've got, I think, under J does not say generally in it, but that's been added to the final version.
One thing I had.
So you're not going to totally remove J, you're just going to add naming will generally not be made? Is that
Yeah,
right?
it was, before it was a hard standard. This way it's just in there as a guideline, but if you've got cases where you have individuals who provided meritorious service or something like that that would justify it, it gives the council or those empowered boards and commissions the flexibility to be able to do that. It's not a prohibition under this policy. It would just be something that would be a normal guideline that we would follow. For example, I mean, if you think about the last couple of years, there are at least 2 instances that I can think of where Cedar Rapids has named streets after living individuals. So you'd have the flexibility to be able to do that. I think one was for Zach Johnson, another one was for Tom Aller. Both, Zach Johnson, of course, being a Masters champion, and then Tom Aller with a long time history of service to the community. Cedar Rapids felt like they wanted to move ahead with that, but generally it's individuals of that type of stature.
Okay, questions on that? Nope.
The second one is a discussion regarding the TIF policy. The TIF policy, we've made some changes to it. The first and probably most substantive one is that I added in a section on the first 3 pages for an economic development policy statement. This is basically a strategy statement for the city of Marion that outlines the circumstances under which we are going to contemplate the use of TIF. It gives a lot of the overall goals that the city seeks to achieve. Those are directly drawn from the strategic plan to show that those would be appropriate uses of TIF. The other thing that it does is it talks about the kind of hierarchy of types of ways that the city would look at using TIF. Basically, it says that you can do direct loans, you can do residual receipt loans, you can do forgivable loans, you can do incentive grants, but it clearly states that the preference is going to be to use rebate agreements, that anytime we're contemplating putting in direct dollars, that's going to be the lowest possible, or the I guess, policy of last resort, only if it would be absolutely necessary for the project to proceed, and if the city council made a determination that was appropriate, would we contemplate doing that. So it's a much more clear direction than I think that we've had in the past. Other changes that were made, changed some of the formatting a little bit to take out a section that had been done as a table talking about base level incentives, and made that a narrative instead, because it was kind of hard to read and confusing the way that it was. So we just changed it into a couple of sentences, and then added a section at the end where the application form will get put in. That's something that we've been working with Medco to put together for the application and intake form. We'll have that along with a flow chart that will show kind of the TIF process and outline that for people who would be applicants that would want to come in. There's only one other change that I need to make. One of the things that I need to do under the Marion Commerce Corridor District, it talks about differing levels of incentives available based on the dollar amount of investment. But if you look at it the way that it's stated, it says like 0 to 250,000, and then it says 251,000 to 400,000. We've got to close that gap, so it'll become like 0 to 250, and then $250,001. So there's not that gap in between.
Now, I couldn't find anywhere in there, but restaurants and bars are not tipped, correct?
It does not preclude them from being included in that policy, but generally for something like that, where there's already competitors that are in the area, it's going to have to be part of a mixed-use structure. In the same way that we would not contemplate providing financial incentives for a convenience store or a pharmacy or a bank or a credit union or something like that on an individual basis, we would not look to do that. But if someone wants to come in and do a 16-acre redevelopment and decide where they want to put the incentives, and they sell 3 acres of it to a credit union, that's not something that we're going to worry about, because it's part of the redevelopment that's tied to the overall area rather than the individual use in that building. Because one of the things that you struggle with is that we may enter into an incentive with a building owner to redo their building. Old Sorg Pharmacy building, and where Parks and Smith is at, is a perfect example. That's a mixed-use building. Right now, he does not have identified tenants. So we've entered into an agreement with him to provide incentives for the redo and facelift of that building. But there's nothing to say that he couldn't eventually lease one of those spaces to a restaurant. But we're providing the incentive to the building owner, not the business. And 5 years from now, the restaurant may leave and a pharmacy could go in there. I mean, we can't control necessarily the turnover of what's in those tenant-spaced buildings. So what we focus on is the infrastructure and the shell itself, and then leave it up to the private sector to determine what goes in it. That's why we will look at the ones where they're multi-tenant spaces.
Okay.
I think the other big change really between the 94 policy and now is just really the change in how economic development is done. I mean, back when the policy was first adopted, there was a considerable amount in the dollar amount of investment per square foot between commercial and industrial buildings. Industrial buildings were much more expensive. In the years since, they've really closed that gap. So the impact of a large-scale commercial building hitting the property tax base really isn't different than an industrial is these days. So, you know, the impact and the benefit to the community is about the same. That's why when you see things like the Marion Enterprise Center, they're marketed as business parks now instead of industrial parks.
Okay.
Any other questions? Number 3 is a discussion that I wanted to have with the council regarding the ethics policy. After the ethics policy was adopted, it's something that procedurally we have provided to all of the board and commission members every year, and then had them sign an acknowledgement that they've received it, they've read it, and they agree to abide by those terms. It's part of something that we do as kind of a continuing education policy, just to make sure that it's always in front of them, that they're aware that it exists, but then also to make sure that we're catching any of the newly appointed board and commission members so that they're aware of it as well. This last go around, when we sent it out, we did have individuals from several different boards and commissions that have said that they are not willing to sign that. That was not something that was really contemplated when the city council adopted it. So we're looking for some direction from the city council about what, if anything, we should do or pursue with individuals who have not and will not sign the ethics policy. Now, I know I've had some questions about it, about the way that we construe that the ethics policy is applied. If you're a member of an individual board and commission, the ethics policy is not intended to preclude that individual from weighing in on other topics before the city council, or before the community. So if a member of the library board wants to make a public comment about something that's going on at the airport, they're free to do so. Where the ethics policy applies is areas where you would be presumed to have functional expertise or would be perceived as acting on behalf of the city. So it would not be appropriate for a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission to go out and be critical of a decision that the Planning and Zoning Commission has made as a group and then attempt to undermine that decision, or, you know, insult other members of that group on public forums or something like that. The basis for it is I think that there's an expectation from the rules of behavior that the city council has set that you will respect the rights and expertise of everybody that you're sitting on a board or a commission with. This is the first time we've really had this. I know in at least one case it was brought up that, well, they've signed it last year, so why wouldn't that be good enough? We have a couple of individuals who might be members of more than one board or commission, and we've not said that you need to sign it for each board or commission that you are a member of, but if you sign it and acknowledge it, that's sufficient. Just looking for some guidance from the city council on how we should proceed with that.
I have not signed it, and I'll tell you why I have not signed it. I swore that I would uphold the Constitution of the United States and the laws of the state and of the city, and I figure basically my critics are the voters, and that's who I am got to worry about. It's not council members, whether you vote for me or not when it comes time, I don't know. But I figure if I'm gonna do something that's illegal, it's gonna be illegal. I'll get arrested.
I don't think they should be able to be on the commission if they don't sign it. It's just personally how I feel.
Lon, can you just share with us I mean, I don't want to, I'm not asking for a brief of confidentiality, but and I appreciate your comment, but what is some of the feedback? What are the concerns that people have about signing that? Do they feel as if though they're giving up some of their rights? Or, I mean, are you getting some kind of pushback as far as some kind of topics that might be a hot button for somebody?
I haven't talked with all of the individuals. The one person that is under a board or commission that I work with that hasn't signed it just basically said, I signed it last year. Why do I need to sign it again? And that's really something for the city council, to consider. I mean, obviously, in that case, they have reviewed it. They have signed on it in the past. And they have knowledge of it. The other ones, I don't know, they're in the planning realm, so I don't know if Tom's gotten any specific feedback on it or not.
I have a couple zoning board of adjustment members that have chose not to sign it too, and I haven't really received much feedback, just that not signing it.
So,
Yeah.
so if someone is perceived to have violated the policy, I mean, it's a policy that's been adopted by the council, right? So it's
correct.
Okay. So if someone's perceived to have violated it somehow, I mean, does it matter if they've signed it or not? Or
It was adopted as a policy of the city of Marion by the city council. We've done the acknowledgement just to make sure that everybody was aware that it exists,
Right.
because a possible defense is I wasn't aware that that was a rule. So by making sure that people are aware of it and acknowledge that they've received it and agree to abide by it, then we know that that option really is off the table. Violations of it, it's the responsibility of the mayor, and ultimately can come to the full city council for enforcement.
Yeah.
I would assume that, like anything else, it would kind of follow the hierarchy of discipline, where the first time it's like, hey, you really shouldn't do that. If they continue to display that pattern of behavior, the city council can remove someone from the appointed boards and commissions at any time if you feel like they're violating your accepted rules of behavior.
Right.
One of the things that we do plan to do moving forward is that when someone applies for a board and commission, it would be something that we would send out, and it would need to be signed and returned before the appointment would show up on the city council agenda for confirmation and approval as a member of that board or commission, so that going forward they would all receive copies of it. It's from an administrative side, we feel like it's a good practice for everybody to see it every year, just to make sure that they kind of keep it in their minds. And there's that possibility that during the course of the year, if the city council chooses to amend it or make changes to it, they're not necessarily going to know that.
I just don't feel that an elected person should be held to that type of thing. Mainly because who is the one that decides that they're in violation? The voters. If they don't like it, you're out.
It was a voter that in the audience that wanted us to have an ethic policy, right? Isn't that how it all came up?
Yeah, actually it was a priority of former Mayor Buska to have an ethics policy adopted, and he had some support from some of our board and commission members to do that. It was a council-initiated action.
I personally think the ethics is important, and it's a benchmark. I understand what you're saying, but we have a ton of committees, we have a ton of boards, we have a ton of things that are going on within our community, that we have all of these little chapters going on, and we have to have something to measure somebody off of as we go down those roads, because if there were to be something that would be contested, I, like many of you, have a lot of designations in the state of Iowa with licenses and oaths that you take, and we've got to have, in my opinion, I think we have to have these ethics in place to make sure that we have somebody that's following the lines and are going to be working in favorable to the city, and that we find some kind of medium ground, if you will, as they're representing the city. I think it's critical. And I think at some point, if we need to either, if the council's adopted it, I have to ask, why are we not following it? Why are these not all being signed? Is it not a condition of employment or by your appointment? If it was the state of Iowa with my license, they would say, thanks, here's your walking papers, you're no longer affiliated or licensed in the state of Iowa.
Same here.
You have to follow those, whether it's real estate, legal, insurance, investments. Why is the city excluded from that? And I think if we had it, there should be rules in there or guidelines that say, how can we have something and not have it? I don't get that. No disrespect to anybody, but I'm thinking, I'm on the fire department. If we do not follow those guidelines, why do we have those guidelines?
But to go one step further, then everybody that's employed by the city should have to sign, because there could be conflicts of interest amongst the city employees.
I don't disagree, and I don't know what a city employee's contract looks like. So whether there's something in the application process or not, I don't know, and that's probably not at our level. But I totally agree with you. But ethics is a critical thing, and I know when the airport commission went to play there, I know there was questions about that as well too. But we are representing the city. We are representing the individuals. We have a guideline to follow. We must stay on the course. We cannot be acting left wing, right wing out of any of these topics.
Yeah, one of the reasons behind it is basically that if you're on a city board or a commission and you're speaking to someone who's not familiar with the operations of that commission, I'll use Planning and Zoning Commission as an example.
Well, that's a perfect one.
You are presumed to be speaking from a position of knowledge. So if a person that's on that commission puts their name in the newspaper and identifies themselves as a member of say the P&Z renders an 8-1 decision, the person who doesn't like the decision is unhappy about it, puts an editorial in the paper and says, this is why this decision was stupid. Well, that's not respectful to the other 8 members of that commission. It's not respectful to the democratic process because you take a vote. And as the council has heard from our strategic planning consultant many, many times in the past, it's a 5-2 vote, but 9-0 support is the expectation. And everybody up there stood up around the table during strategic planning and said to each other that that's what you were going to do. That's the heart of the city's ethics policy. When you're that member of that Planning and Zoning Commission, you're presumed by the public to be speaking from a position of authority and representing the views of the city of Marion. And that's where that distinction comes in about the constitutional thing about having the right to free speech. If you are presumed to be speaking from that position of authority and presumed to be speaking for the position of the city of Marion, then it behooves the city of Marion to make sure that that position is consistent with what you, as the city council, have set as the guidelines for those boards and commissions. To date, the guidelines have been embodied in the ethics policy and the guidance that you give all those different boards and commissions about the tasks that you like them to do. That's the way that you make sure that they are doing what you've done or what you want to accomplish as embodied by the strategic plan. Otherwise, you've got 22 boards and commissions that really could just be going all their own way all over the place. There are certain ones that are empowered by state law or by local election that you don't have control over. You can't control what the water board does. If the water board decides to do something that the city council doesn't like, your only recourse is to replace the members of the water board. But you don't have purview to get in and second guess and change the results of one of their decisions. But those are few and far between. The other ones all fall underneath the city council. To Mary Lou's question about ethics for city employees, the city employees are covered by a 100-plus page personnel policy. If you're in a bargaining unit, you've got contracts. So there's things like nepotism policies and all sorts of stuff in those policies to try to prevent those kind of situations from occurring. Very different than the Code of Ethics. Some of us, like me, Amanda, Doug, by virtue of being members of our professional associations, we fall underneath their code of ethics, just like what Councilman Stranad was talking about. So virtually all of the professional staff are going to fall underneath those guidelines, which are a lot more stringent and a lot more restrictive than anything the City of Marion has adopted. So I guess the question is, where does the council want to go from here? Just from a personal opinion standpoint, I think if they're not willing to follow the rules that the city council has set out and the expectations that you have for them to be on a board and commission, they should not be on that board and commission. I think if a refusal to sign the Code of Ethics acknowledgement form should be considered a voluntary resignation from that board or commission.
The refusal to sign doesn't mean that they're not going to abide by the policy. Does it?
What is it?
But if they're
Council said that you need to sign it. Right? Isn't that that's what this says? Is council, the resolution says that you have to sign
That
it.
it applies to the boards and commissions, yes. Now, do you allow some flexibility for someone who signed it last year and just says, I don't need to sign it again?
Well, how long has this been in, this has been in effect since November 2012. But there was a council member who definitely violated many of those tenets and was never even have his little finger slapped. And he was very insulting as far as a religion is concerned, about age problems that he considered were available, and nothing happened there.
Well, that would have been the discretion of the mayor at the time to, as far as from me reading this resolution or that Code of Ethics, the mayor is the one that should have done something.
Well, and again, those types of topics are outside of the purview of the City of Marion. Those were not things that were representing the official position of the City of Marion, where the City Council had taken action to say, this is what we think. And so when you start looking at it, people are still allowed to have your personal opinions. It's where you're being presumed to speak for the City of Marion that this applies. People as individuals or business owners still have the ability to say whatever they want or whatever comes to mind based on their personal convictions. But in my mind, when people start to think of you and start to tie you to the City of Marion as this represents an official position of the City of Marion, that's where you start treading into that territory. I mean, the City Council is the policy-making entity of this organization, and you set the policy that the staff is supposed to follow and that your boards and commissions are supposed to follow. And if you have an individual member that doesn't follow that, then it's the council's purview for how you handle it.
Personally, I think we need to maintain it, we need to enforce it.
That they have to sign.
It's a condition of your appointment or elected position.
Oh, now, whoa. You got people out there that will decide if it's in their best interest to have you as their representative.
How does a vote, though, determine whether somebody should follow a rule of ethics? So are you saying, just so I'm clarifying this, so if I say we should have this, that the public would not vote for me because I feel strongly that we need a code of ethics that needs to be followed by and a benchmark?
I don't explain.
I'm confused with your question,
Oh,
Council.
I'm confused with your statement.
I'm just saying, I signed it. I think it's good. In my industry, it's done every day, and ours are much stronger than what ours are here as a city. This is a very relaxed code of ethics from what I deal with on a daily basis. All we're doing is simply following a guideline so that the mayor does have that lateral movement to say, you're out of line, That shouldn't have been done. It can be addressed because it has something to come back to. Otherwise, there is no employee handbook. There is no contract for these individuals, appointed or if they're elected to these positions. So where do you, from a human resource standpoint, where do you measure these people by? You shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have said that. That's incorrect. That's wrong. You gotta bring it back. I've dealt with enough HR, just as our respective administration has. You gotta have that line somewhere to navigate to say we were out of bounds on this one. We weren't out of bounds on this one. There's nothing to tie anybody back to. I'm a little confused why people are concerned about signing something. If a person's that adamant about signing a code of ethics, I got to say, whoa, maybe I didn't get the elected person that I want for that position, because I know that by them signing that, they will not be working in our best interest as a community, as an individual, as a city.
But the distinction I want to make is I'm not arguing against requiring people to sign it. I mean, that's all good, but the policy is the policy, and it's there.
Correct.
And whether or not they've signed it, we're going to enforce it. That's the distinction I'm trying to make.
Correct, and that was my
we're going to expect
opinion
everybody
only.
to live by it, and we're going to enforce it. Whether or not they can say they knew about it or not, that's a separate issue. Maybe that's why we need to have everybody sign it. But it's going to be enforced. It is until it's changed by the council. It is a policy. It is there. Everybody's expected to abide by it, whatever board you serve on, and it's the expectation.
Is
It's
this
the
on the
requirement.
website?
I'm not sure if that's on the website or not. I'd have to look. I know that we provide it to all the boards and commissions individually to make sure that they have it. And again, it's up to the city council. To the mayor's point, if your expectation is that people are going to follow that rules of behavior and you're going to enforce it and apply it and just follow the line that ignorance of the policy is no excuse, then that's fine. The only thing I would say then is that it's probably not worth our time at the staff level to print it and chase down those acknowledgement forms every year, and we probably would just go to making sure that people who are newly appointed would get a copy of it and sign the acknowledgement form before being appointed to the boards and commissions. If we're not going to make everybody follow the same rules that we've applied and say, no, you don't have to sign it because we're just going to enforce it, but all these other people have signed it, there's no reason for us to have anybody sign it.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't ask everybody to sign it. I'm just trying to make sure that we know that distinction, because I felt the conversation going in the direction of if everybody doesn't sign it, how can we enforce it? It's there. It's a policy.
It's there.
It can be enforced, but I'm not saying we shouldn't then have everybody sign it.
So you're encouraging me to sign my Board of Ethics, even though I
course.
signed
It's hard
it
for
a
me
long
to-
time ago.
It's hard for me to understand why somebody wouldn't sign it, but
So you've signed it
I did.
previously,
I signed it previously.
and there's been no changes since.
Well,
It hasn't been amended since we adopted it.
Hit the print button quick.
Oh, go away.
I think it's just a way to confirm that we all understand that we're serving in a capacity for the city and serving on these boards and commissions and council, and that we're going to respect decisions of the body that we're serving on, that even though we may have disagreed on certain issues or things, that when a decision is made, it becomes a decision of that body, and that we're going to respect that. And I mean, that's how I see it, and that we're going to have mutual respect for each other and how we treat each other in public, how we treat city decisions in public. Is that a good assessment of it? I mean, that's...
Yeah, the essence of it is supposed to be that everybody makes their best argument. You state your best case to the point at which the city council takes a vote, and at the point that the city council takes a vote, the decision has been made. And
or the
the
planning and zoning or
expectation for
whichever
us,
commission.
yeah, the expectation for us as the staff is to take that decision of the city council and move forward. People can be critical of it, they can disagree with it, and that's perfectly fine. But it's not something where you want people going out and actively in their role as city council members trying to put obstacles in the way of the staff carrying out that decision, or trying to impede its progress or something like that. There's nothing wrong with providing additional questions, asking additional information, anything like that. Where you start to get bogged down, and I've seen this happen with past city council members in other communities, no new information is ever presented, but every meeting just turned into a rehashing of the same issue from 7 city council meetings ago, whether it was on the agenda or not. And this type of a policy precludes that kind of thing from happening.
Well, I made it through Independence Day, all right.
Thank you.
I guess,
So what do we do?
would it be acceptable then, I mean, for the individuals that haven't signed, from what I'm gathering here, if they've signed it in the past, do you have concerns about them signing the acknowledgement form again? I mean, that'll change what we do at the staff side procedurally, then we would just focus on newly appointed board and commission members. But anybody who had signed it in the past, we would just presume that they knew about it and they were agreeing to abide by it. But I would say, do you want us to just tell anybody who's not ever signed it and is refusing to sign it, you know, if you haven't signed it by the end of August, we'll consider it a voluntary resignation and seek to appoint someone else to the board?
It probably should be on the application form, so they're aware that, you know, when you accept a position, you're expected to sign the acknowledgement of the policy. So, you know, before they apply, they're aware of that as a condition.
Yeah, that's easy enough to do.
I think signing it once is probably good enough, then you don't have to.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll change how we follow up on it. We'll still provide it just to make sure it stays in front of everyone, but we'll track who has signed it and who hasn't, and then just catch people as they come on to the boards and commissions. Okay.
Okay.
Number 4 is a public hearing that'll be held. One of the requirements of the Community Development Block Grant Program is that you have to do a public hearing during the course of the project prior to the point at which you close it out to update the public about what's going on, where the project is at. In the past, it's been called the Status of Funded Activities Report. It's basically an opportunity for people to hear about where you're at and to provide feedback on it. So once that's held, we will knock that requirement out of the park, and we'll be done. Number 6 and the associated item number 7 are actually going to be removed from the agenda.
Okay.
I have something I would like to bring up.
Yes, ma'am.
This motion to receive and file the census certification. Is there some way we can put that amount of money that we're going to be making, which we wouldn't be making if we hadn't done the special census, into some kind of an account or something to pay down on the bond debts? I mean, it's only 2.6 mil, but I think it would be a good faith product as far as the citizens are concerned, that you know, here we're going to have some extra money, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to try to even out what we owe.
Staff perspective, is that? I mean, I thought about the same thing, but
That's entirely up to the city council. One thing I would caution you, though, with doing that with the road use fund is that towards the end of every decade, our operating expenses for road use tend to catch up and exceed the amount that we're receiving any given year. That's one of the reasons why we do this. I mean, if we add another 15 miles of street, Ryan's not going to be able to get by without adding another snowplow operator. So, you know, I get a little hesitant to take things like that go towards supporting those operating costs and saying we're going to use it for bonded indebtedness. The other part of it is the local option sales tax. You can use that for any lawful purpose, and lawful purposes certainly would include early pay down of debt. One of the things that I'm working on with our debt consultant is that we're not like when cities borrow, it's not like a bank where you can just go ahead and prepay anytime you want. Bonds are only callable at certain times, and that's your opportunity to prepay. So we're identifying opportunities coming up over the next several bond cycles where we would have opportunities to be able to pay that down.
It's like a windfall. I just think that it would be, rather than say, oh my gosh, look at, we've got an extra $2 million, let's go out and, have a party or something. Do something dumb.
We should decide if it's pay off debt, if it's, well, do we accelerate this project for this road to do it sooner than later? I mean, that's...
Well, the whole thing is, it would be stipulated that if there was a shortage as far as like road use, that you could go in and use this. But I think that just being kind of handed this $2.6 million is, it ought to just be kind of put aside in case of dire emergencies.
Can do that too. Go into savings.
I did want the council to be aware that we've got one item to add to a receive and file. Received it after the city council packet was prepared and sent out before the 4th weekend, but gotten a proposal from a gentleman that lives out east of town. There's an old control box on the railroad right-of-way. He actually would like to be able to go in and salvage that. He's got a railroad display and some old railroad memorabilia out at his property. So he's got a picture of it. It's just a receive and file at this point, but something for the council to consider. Just didn't want it to show up and be a surprise.
Anything else?
I guess I have a question here. Can you tell us where, and I'm paraphrasing here, but have we had anything come through in reference to Mr. Knutson's issue with voting by wards? Was there supposed to be something on the agenda, or?
We were anticipating having that on the Tuesday work session at the next city council meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I know there was some discussion, and it was all hearsay. I wasn't able to capture all the details, so I was just curious as to where that was or what we had going. So, okay.
Anything else? Other questions?
I think I've said about all I can say. Thanks for signing.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.